Welcome everyone who came, and thank you for coming for this presentation. My name is Rick Davis, and I am the president of the Wawenoc chapter of the Maine Genealogical Society, which meets here in Belfast at the library every month, with the exception of December, on the third Wednesday of the month at this time. And of course, we're now meeting in Zoom, and that allows folks from outside to attend, which is a plus, but it means that we can't see each other in person as much and interact. And I see BJ is checking in, so I'm going to hold off and let her get here. BJ is at our state library and was the former reference and special collections librarian at the Belfast Free Library before Sharon came. And she's actually going to be next month's presenter, but we'll tell you about that at the end of the meeting. And I'll hold off until I get BJ in here.
I'm here.
Okay, great. You've changed a little bit. Your face looks like a tree. I don't want to be personal, but so I am going to be doing the presentation today. It's about a community called Peterborough in Maine. And I'll tell you how that came about and some of the things that I learned about it in the course of my research project. I'm going to give you a PowerPoint presentation, so you'll be seeing a set of slides that we'll go through. And I have some other material to give you, so I won't just be reading the slides. So I'm going to ask that if you have a question along the way, if you would just put that in the chat at the bottom of your screen. If you're not that familiar with Zoom, there's a little button that looks like a cartoon balloon, and it says chat, and it'll pop up with a window and you can type your question in there. Sharon, who's the reference librarian now at the Belfast Free Library, has graciously agreed to review that at the end, and I'll be able to then keep the presentation up or whatever, so she can read off the questions and we'll try to answer them. And of course, I'll also take questions at the end if you didn't put them in before that. So I think we will proceed now and get going. So we're in Maine, which everyone I think is pretty familiar with as a very white state, a very small number of people of color. But there have always been Blacks particularly and other ethnic groups that are non-white in the state of Maine. And one of those was the community of Peterborough, which was one of several dozen basically all free Black communities that arose in Maine at the beginning of the 1800s. And Peterborough was one of the largest. It was a community within the town of Warren. And in most of these other towns around, there were some in Gardner and in Eastport, and of course in Portland, much bigger, and Augusta, and a few other communities around Maine. It had towns in Maine that had communities of free Blacks. The difference, Peterborough was kind of unique because it was started by a couple who owned their own land, and I'll explain how that came about as well. So in many of the others, I've looked at a couple of them, and people will come in for 10 years or so, and then they leave and go somewhere else. So there was a lot of what we might think of today as transients. But the descendants of the original Peter couple, Peters, it was originally Petersborough, but it got shortened to Peterborough. And it never actually was on the map as such, as far as I can tell. But their descendants lived in that same area for over 150 years. The last of the Peters descendants having moved away in the 1950s as the population there dwindled and jobs were elsewhere. now, there we go. So last summer, my wife Corliss came across an article in the Working Waterfront, which is a publication of the Island Institute that is added to the Bangor Daily News quarterly, I guess it is. And there was a little article about a cemetery in a place called Peterborough, and that had been there a long time. And so it seemed like something interesting. We were looking for places to walk due to the pandemic. They couldn't go to the YMCA to exercise. So this looked like an interesting place, and it was near a garden that we could go visit before heading over to this. So I did a little Google research, and I came across this article from the Free Press, the Mid-Coast Free Press, that was actually published in August of 2017, called Remembering Peterborough, Warren's 19th Century Free Black Colony. And this article runs about 3 pages or so, and it has some nice photographs in it as well, including this one, which was taken by the author of the article, Andy O'Brien. This is the sign marking the entrance to the Peterborough Cemetery, and you can see there the little yard, the drive, or the walk rather, going down into where the cemetery is, back into woods a ways.
I think Corliss is going to come tap you because you haven't shared your screen yet.
You're not seeing?
No, it didn't go through. You might have to click another window or something like that.
This worked when we did it, just.
I know. It always works on the test run.
So what are you seeing? Just me?
Just all everyone's feeds.
Well, I noticed that I'm just seeing you now, and not myself either. This is a bummer. I'm not seeing the controls either.
Did the share screen button disappear at the bottom?
Maybe because I'm in full screen. Let me get out of that. No, I still don't. I don't even see the thing at the top that tells me I can exit out.
Rick, if you try just putting your mouse right on top of where the pictures are, and see if the
in the screen.
Yeah, and see if that pops up the menu at the bottom.
No, I'm not getting the menu. I'm getting it just like I would if I were at home, which I am. But I'm not seeing the Zoom controls, but I'm still hooked up, obviously. I wonder if, is my video off? Can you see me?
No, we can see you just fine. So you can see at the bottom, like where it says security, participants, polls, chat.
Yeah, I can't see any of that. And when I click on the little Zoom camera button, I don't get any response. Usually it brings that screen back up.
Can you very quickly, is this a PowerPoint?
Yes.
If you send it to Sharon, she should be able to share it.
All right, you want us to try that, Sharon?
Yeah, that works.
Was that a yes?
Yep, yeah.
Okay. It'll take just a second.
That works. We need an insert elevator button music for you know, just pause here.
Oh, nope, that's on my desktop, so I have to find where it is actually.
You can just pop it in the chat and then I can pull it from there and share screen with everyone.
All right, here we go. Let's see, presentation. All right, so there it is. Okay, that's loaded up now. And I'm sending.
Did you email it or did you
I
Oh.
emailed it.
emailed it? Okay. All right, Gmail. All right, I've got it. Hold on, let me download it.
There seems to be something wrong with my connection though, because I can't get back to the Zoom.
All right.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's where it is. I forgot. All right. All right.
Okay, can you see it okay?
I can see it.
Yes, I can see everything now.
Okay, all
All
right.
right.
Yeah, I can see it.
Well, all that stuff I just said.
All right, let's see, where were we? I think we were looking.
No, you're going for, right, there's where we were. We were at the cemetery.
All right,
And
so you want to go to the next one?
let's go to the next one.
Okay.
So
Damn it.
I read the article by Andy O'Brien, and he mentioned Kate McMahon, who is as you can see on the slide, the museum specialist at the Center for the Study of Global Slavery at the National Museum of African American History and Culture at the Smithsonian Institution. She must have a very large business card. But that's where she is. And she did her master's and PhD dissertation in history about the Blacks in the Maine maritime trades. That is her area of interest. And so she's researched and
Oh, I'm sorry.
she's researched considerably about Peterborough. And that's basically the basis of about half of her dissertation is just Peterborough itself. So I actually tracked her down and sent her an email and said I was interested in this subject, and that I was also interested that she had quoted some census figures and census information. So I asked her if anyone had ever looked at the genealogy of the folks there. And she said, no, they hadn't. And she would be thrilled if I was interested in taking my genealogical research skills and apply those to the people there. So being someone who just loves doing research projects, that's all it took me to get me launched. So then I began really researching the family of the Peterses. Next slide. Along the way, I also was introduced via email to Thomas Ziegler, who is a Peterborough descendant and who I invited here today, but I don't think he made it. I'm not sure. He may have the wrong. I'm not sure he lives in the Eastern time zone. He may have gotten that off. But at any rate, and he was very helpful. He had a lot of detailed information about his own family. He actually is not from Peterborough. His branch of the family moved to Philadelphia. So now on to the founders of Peterborough, beginning with Sarah. Sarah was born in Guinea, which is a country on the very western edge of Africa, in about 1752. And she was captured there and enslaved, and then brought to America and sold to a man by the name of Captain James McIntyre. And it happened to be that James McIntyre, as a ship captain, had some property near the end of South Pond in Warren, which is an important fact for you to know, as you will see soon. Next slide, please. So she was an enslaved person, and in 1783, the state of Massachusetts outlawed slavery. And since Maine was at that time, of course, a province of Massachusetts, Sarah heard about this decision and she had saved some money. So she paid a local lawyer $1 to argue that she should also be free because she lived in part of Massachusetts, basically. And she won her case. So she then earned her freedom at just about the time that she had a son by the name of Paul Mink, who was named after his father, Paul Mink, a white man. And also at about that time, she married another man who, next slide, please, was named Amos Peters. Now, Amos was from Plymouth, Mass. He was a mixture of African and Wawenoc, and he was owned by a man named James Peters, so he acquired that surname. And he enlisted in the Continental Army, which apparently in those days meant that he earned his freedom by doing that. Amos came to the attention of General Henry Knox, and those of us that are living in Knox County probably know who he is. We've undoubtedly all seen his house, even if we haven't been in. It's a replica, of course. General Knox, his wife, Lucy Flucker, was the granddaughter of General Samuel Waldo, a name familiar to those of us who live in Waldo County. Waldo had, by various means, acquired something like 300,000 acres of land in Maine. He provided a service to some of the original proprietors, and for that he got a chunk of land. And he had 4 children who inherited that land, and Lucy's mother was one of them. So Henry Knox inherited a quarter of that land and then proceeded to buy a bunch more, so that he ended up with basically most of what General Waldo had, something like 300,000 acres of Maine territory. And Amos met him somehow or other. Did I say that Amos was born about 1737? I don't think I did. Somehow they connected together in the war, and he must have impressed General Knox, or some people think he may have done a spy mission for Knox. There's a rumor that Amos had his ear shot off while he was in the service. But at any rate, at the end of the war, General Knox awarded Amos Peters 150 acres of land that he owned out of his hundreds of thousands. And that land that he, by a subsequent deed, said it was by, quote, general agreement, because there actually wasn't a deed. So the 150 acres was, guess what? It was at the south end of South Pond. So we can have the next slide. This is a map of that area of Warren. You can see the tail end of South Pond at the north end, the back river coming out of it, heading southward. The McIntyre properties were just to the right of the end of the lake. This is a map from 1851, and there are a couple of McIntyre landowners still there. And if you can see, there's a sort of a point about halfway down the back river that points off to the left. That point is actually pointing to Peterborough, as it turns out. And I'm not sure how big the image is on your screen. Is that a full screen? Sharon?
No, it's not.
It's not, okay.
So are you seeing the presenter view too? Sorry, I can't see what you see versus what I see.
Oh, well, I'm seeing, it must be a presenter view, because what I'm seeing is my main image and then a thing of the next slide.
Okay. Let me, how's that?
That's better, that's closer, but it's only a part of it. So maybe we need to go back to what we had.
Oh gosh. All right, let me see.
Yeah, okay, There it is. All right, so I see what Corliss is seeing now. I'm seeing that same thing, and then I'm also seeing the gallery view of the other people. So that point in the river points to where Peterborough was. There is a house marked as W. Peters and a house marked J. Peters, and they are in the little rectangular block there that you see. Those were William and John Peters, who were grandchildren of Amos and Sarah. And then just north of them is a block, and one of the houses there says R. Mink. And that would be Reuben Mink, who was Paul Mink's son. And if you remember, that was Sarah's son by the white man. Just below, just south of the Peters properties is, you may be able to kind of make it out. It says it's a school, number 16. That school was built to serve the members of the Peterborough community. I'm sure there were some racial issues involved as to why they got their own school, but they did petition for one. And so their children went to this school. So this whole area here is where Peterborough was, even though it was not identified as such, as far as I could tell on any map. So next slide, please. This was kind of a different type of research project. Most of the time we're doing for our own genealogical research, we're starting with ourselves or someone and going back in time, trying to find ancestors. Other times we might be doing what are called surname projects. For example, if our surname is Murch, we might want to do a project that finds all of the Murch descendants who have the name Murch. And our own Dana has actually done that and published it. And there are some others. But this one was trying to trace all of the descendants of Peter and Sarah, regardless of where they ended up and regardless of surnames. So when the Peters' daughters would marry someone with a different surname, I continued that line down. The idea is to try to get to the present so that people who were researching their ancestry, if they could tag into that and trace themselves back to Peter and Sarah. And of course, because they were not enslaved, they are listed in even the 1850 census by name, which enslaved people were not. Next slide, please. So, of course, I used a lot of sources in this project. I've already mentioned Kate and Thomas, and I don't think, I'm just going to check and see if Thomas has joined us here. It looks like not. And, okay. And I was very fortunate because there were a couple of sources, which I know the folks in Warren are very familiar with. One was the Annals of the Town of Warren by a man named Cyrus Eaton. He actually did several of these volumes on towns in that general area, and his daughter updated a couple of them. So I think the edition that I used actually, I think, was his daughter's edition. There was also a pamphlet written in 1888 called Warren History. And one of the features of that was that the town of Warren had a census that was taken of all of the inhabitants at that time. And that is all the results of that are reprinted in this pamphlet, Warren History, which is available online, which was great because it listed the various Peters families and the others. And that, of course, for genealogists, this is a wonderful thing because this is right in that time period near 1890 where there is no US census available for most of the country. So we had a touch point in there where we could pick up the thread between 1870 and 1880 and 1900. And of course, lots of US Census records. The vital records of Warren that were compiled by Marlene Grove, Also, state vital records of Maine and Massachusetts, because many of these folks left the area, or some of them left the area and went to Boston, where, of course, their job opportunities were greater. Slide, please. Also, when we get into the era of the Civil War, there in Ancestry, there is a database of the colored troops military service records. So I was able to track those people from Peterborough who did serve in the Civil War. Also, city directories of the various cities in the area where these folks settled out. A lot of them ended up early in the 20th century in Thomaston and Rockland areas. Find a grave, of course, is always healthy, or helpful, I should say. One of those, the Peterborough Cemetery, has been transcribed to some degree, but I ended up from my visit, and I think, yes, there are actually about 40 readable stones there in that cemetery, and many of them are not even listed on the Find a Grave, much less having photos of them. So doing a little local legwork supplemented that considerably. The Social Security Death Index, which again is available in several different places, which gives for those people who were signed up with Social Security. So it's obviously a 20th century, 21st century database, but it gives dates of birth and dates and location of death in most cases. So that's also very helpful. And then I was able to tie into a number of local newspaper databases that I subscribed to that enabled me to find obituaries, which are a real rich source of biography, not only for the decedent, but also for identifying surviving and predeceased relations. Slide, please. So that was the wrong way. There we go. So the findings. I was able to identify 87 family groups that I compiled sketches for, if you will, mostly a little bit of narrative and a lot of genealogical data. And I did take those all the way up to the present. The version of my research that I sent to the Historical Society does not include any living people. It does indicate that there are living people. So I know that there are literally hundreds of descendants around who are living, but they were not identified. And I didn't find them all because once I got to a living person, I stopped researching. So I don't have the children and grandchildren of some of those living descendants. But it did run to about 80 pages of text. And at the end, there's a 5-page, I call it a guide. It's basically sort of a numerical index of the 87 families and who their spouse was and who the parents were, so you can connect them all together. And just for one more little trivia fact, there were 683 footnotes documenting the research on these families. So now you may want to know what I found other than a bunch of people. Well, if I will go to the next slide, there were 3 areas that I found significant to kind of look at more closely. Actually, there was a 4th, which was how many of the people there died of tuberculosis, which was pretty common at that time in the country. And I always associate that with cities, but there was a fair amount of tuberculosis in its own different forms in even more rural areas as well. But there was considerable endogamy, which I will discuss in a minute. I also looked at the Civil War service of the descendants. And then also I noticed that there were a significant number of mixed race marriages over the years. And so I took a closer look at that too. And I see we have Arthur and Sarah who want to come I mean, I don't know if I can, I guess I can admit them. Such power. So if we can have the next slide, please. There we go. So endogamy is the practice of marrying within a special social group, caste, or ethnic group, according to the Wikipedia. I think we could probably also add geographic group. This is a well-known phenomenon among such things as Ashkenazi Jew families who will marry within their group, and some other religious groups, the Amish being one. We just changed our slide there.
Sorry, I thought I would be able to get it, but oh well. Can't get it full screen.
All right, there we go.
Sorry, Rick.
I know I have ancestors that lived for a long time on Nantucket Island, which is another place where there was a lot of intermarriage. And so if we can go to the next slide, I'll give you a really good example here of the level of endogamy among the folks in Peterborough. Amos and Sarah had 3 surviving sons who left descendants: Isaac, Jacob, and Benjamin. Benjamin was the youngest, and he had 4 surviving children who left descendants. And as you can see from this slide, those 4 all married descendants of Benjamin's brother Isaac. So these are all first cousin marriages. And subsequently, there were other cousin marriages down the line. So people that were first cousins and also second cousins in addition. So there were a lot of Peterses and their descendants around this area. And since these folks all stayed in the same general area, that's what makes this so unique, because we're able to track those families in a consistent place and thereby in a consistent way. I also mentioned the Civil War. So if we can have the next slide. The United States military started accepting African Americans in large numbers into the service in 1863. And so I looked at, it might be a typical military service age. People, males, of course, that were 16 to say 30 in that year. And out of the Peterborough descendants, the descendants of Amos and Sarah, there were 12. 6 of those served in the US Army, and 2 of them served in the US Navy, and 1 who I think had already moved to Boston served in the Massachusetts Cavalry. So out of those 12, 9 served in the military. 2 of them did not survive the war. So this was a group that was actively supportive of the Union and of the military, and 2 of them paid the ultimate price for that dedication. In addition to the ones that you see here, there was also, let me see here. There was also William H. Peters, who enlisted in the Army at the age of 45. Again, strong support for the military. And he was not in my group of 12 because he was much older than I would have expected, but he did enlist. There's a kind of an interesting story about another man who actually had been a prisoner at the state penitentiary, and he escaped and made his way 30 miles or so to Belfast. And he had been charged, he was in prison for larceny. And so he got to Belfast and burglarized a couple of places and got some clothes. And the 20th Maine was at that point recruiting in the general area. And he found his way to the recruiting department for the 20th Maine and actually was able to sign up. Before long, however, they discovered that they had a darker member of their group, and they began to question whether he should be there because, of course, the Union Army was not integrated for another 80 years or so. So he was found out and they sent him back to prison, lengthened his sentence for having escaped, and he ended up dying in prison in 1865. But so there's a little Belfast connection there too, such as it is. So can I have the next slide? The last topic I mentioned was mixed race marriages. I found by going through, there were 23 Peters descendants who married outside the Black race. Most of these were white, the spouses. Two of them actually were from the Cape Verde Islands, which I had to look up. Those are islands that were colonized by, they were territories of Portugal. They lie just off the west coast of Africa, ironically, not far from where Sarah was born in Guinea. These islands were, as I say, a territory of Portugal, so they speak Portuguese, and most of the people who live there now, the residents, have both European roots and the plantation people that went down there, and African roots of the people who they enslaved or bought to work on their plantations. So they're about half and half, European and African in ancestry. So two of them fell into that category, but the other 21 were white that were married in. You can see the pattern here. There were a few in the late 1800s. There were 10 marriages in what must have been a real heyday of this in the area between 1900 and 1919. Then there were 4 during the 20s and 30s. And finally, after 1940, there were still 4 more situations of somebody descended from the original Amos and Sarah Peters who married a white person. One interesting sidelight there was a descendant named Cora Peters who married 4 times. And each time she married a white man. Never had any children, but she did have a string of marriages that were all mixed marriages. So she alone represents 4 of the 23. So I think that's the end of the slides. So we can go back to the regular view. There we are. And this was, it was a great project to do, especially during a pandemic. I had plenty of time to devote to it. And I actually spent somewhere between about 6 to 8 hours a day for weeks and weeks working on this and compiling all this information. And I very much enjoyed it. And I learned a lot about free Black history in Maine. There are a couple of books on the subject. And I learned a whole lot about Peterborough and Warren. That's all of the presentation. And now I see there are only 5 chats. Maybe I could just go back and review those myself, Sharon. All right, I don't see any slides. I don't either. Were there any questions, Sharon? No,
Not
okay.
that I saw, no.
All right, anyone have any questions now? You can unmute and ask away.
This is really not directly related to what you were talking about, although it is. There was an article that was referred to, I believe, in the New England Historic Genealogical Society's blog today about
Yes.
slave owners in southern Maine and the
Yeah,
large
yes.
numbers of very prominent people who had owned slaves in Maine. We don't think about that, but it was certainly the case.
Yes, anyone who belongs to SGN, I think everybody gets that weekly newsletter. It comes out on Wednesdays. And it was the very first one of the always very interesting little set of things that they find in the news. Thanks for that. Other questions?
I was surprised to see with these legal marriages, I know mixed race marriage wasn't federally approved till in the middle 1900s.
Right.
What was it for Maine and Massachusetts? I was surprised to see them getting married in the 1800s.
If I remember right, and I should have written this down, Diane, I believe that it was legal in Massachusetts after about 1830. So it was before the time period when we're seeing those here. This is, it's a northern state and they had a little different attitude. But I was surprised by how many there were too.
I think that Loving decision by the US Supreme Court was not until 1967, but
Right.
that was based on a couple in Virginia. So
Yes.
right.
Yeah. So it was legal in a number of
States
places.
allowing.
Yeah, it was legal in a number of places well before that, but not in the South.
While I was living up in Machias and attending the university up there, one of the professors, Marcus Labrizzi, did research on a Black community and published a book called Lost Adisville. And I read the book and found it quite fascinating because those were all free people. They
Mhm.
participated in the
Civil War.
Revolutionary War,
Mhm.
and there was a lot of intermarriages going on there too.
Sure.
But that community has died out.
What was the name, Sharon, of the community? Oh,
Adisville, Adusville.
agents.
I've not heard of that one.
Mhm.
And it was written by Marcus Labrizzi.
Interesting.
I'll click, there's a link I found. I'll click on that and maybe put it in the chat.
Yeah,
So
that would be helpful. Yes, and unfortunately, there is a book that's been written about kind of a history of African Americans in Maine, and it's the name of it is escaping me now. It's one of Kate McMahon's references, and I got that out of the library.
It's called Maine's Visible Black History,
Yes.
and it's by H.H. Price and Gerald Talbot. Gerald Talbot's daughter is Rachel Talbot Ross, who is a representative from Portland in Maine. I mean, in the Maine legislature. Maine's Visible Black History. And it's sort of seminal, I believe, in a way, really a remarkable work that was published, I think, in the early, before, maybe 2006, but certainly not this decade, but the decade before.
Yes, and it has information.
Still very relevant.
It has information about a number of communities. I know Gardner was listed in there. I see there's a question about future projects. I did look at a number of other communities around Eastport and Gardner are two of the ones that I looked at specifically once I was done with the Peterborough project. But unfortunately, as I said at the very beginning, and I think Allison, you may have come in after I mentioned this, that the Peterborough community seems to have been unique, in my opinion. This is just sort of a hypothesis because of the land ownership. So they had a permanent place for people to work and thrive, and then also pass that on to descendants. Whereas in the other places, most of them were laborers, although there were a lot of Peters descendants who were laborers too, or seamen, or other trades, so that they didn't have as much opportunity to amass the wealth that a chunk of land, in this case 150 acres, could provide. So they were much more transitory in terms of who lived in each place. So it was kind of disappointing. I thought maybe we could really compile a bunch of them, but the people came and went, and there was no really way to even keep connections, because the families didn't keep connections to a particular place.
I really like the way you combine the different kinds of sources, almost like an anthropological study, and the history, and the maps, and the with the genealogy,
Well, thank you.
merging them.
Yeah. I don't know how many of you have heard of Malaga Island. Maybe,
South
maybe.
Carolina? Georgia?
Yes, I did get that book through the Belfast Free Library, Sharon. The one that was just mentioned. Malaga Island is off it's near Phippsburg. And it was a very sad story about the people that had lived there for decades, who were then rounded up and moved off the island, and many of them were put into mental institutions or other places that they really didn't need to be in. So they were basically purged off of the island for the most part. It's a very sad story. And that is covered somewhat in that book. But it deserves a story of its own. And in fact, Kate McMahon, whose name I mentioned at the beginning, has done some anthropological work on with the Malaga Island sites, because there are still artifacts being found there, and research in that whole sort of sordid, shameful history. And that happened, I believe, in the early 20th century.
Didn't you say, Rick, that a lot of Kate's research had to do with the sailors, the seamen?
Yes.
Who were free blacks? Did she publish a book? Or you mentioned her dissertation. Is that available somewhere?
Actually, I did get a copy of it. She sent me a copy of her dissertation, and also an article. Also, her master's thesis was also on the same topic. I don't know that she's actually published a book on it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't become a book sooner or later, because it's a pretty unique niche if you think about it. Free blacks in the state of Maine, which you don't think there would be very many. But apparently there were actually many blacks that came here to work in the maritime industries, either on the ships or as shipbuilders. And there were a number of Peters descendants I found that died at the ocean, in the sea, on one of the voyages. Any other questions?
Not a question, but just to answer Sharon's question in the chat, I looked in the catalog and I put links to both. So we have a copy of at the Library of Maine's Visible Black History. So it says it's available. So if you wanted to come down now, you could get it. And then the other one, the Lost Adisville, it looks like there's a library that will lend it. So if you wanted to request it or ask me and I can request it for you, you could read it through the library. So.
That was a very interesting read, I have to admit.
It sounds like it would be.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to your presentation, Rick, because it describes the first people that settled the town and some of the descendants and what life was like for them, which was interesting but sad at the same time.
Yes, but it sounded similar to me too.
Yeah.
All
Well,
right,
I thought what also was sad was the first cousins marrying each other, but if they couldn't marry outside of their race, what were they going to do? They were the only people around.
well, and that was one of the little.
Sad.
That was one of the statistics that I think I missed when going through about the endogamy.
No,
Yes.
yeah, you covered it.
Well, in okay. Oh, here we go. In 1830, looking at the census records, in Peterborough, there were 10 black males and 11 black females, aged 24 and up. So that doesn't give you very many people from which to find a mate. So you're right. So there are cousins. Obviously, there were later on expansion by marrying white folks or Cape Verdeans in a couple of cases. But until then, it was primarily between themselves and also a couple of other families that came in to live in Peterborough and also work in those industries. There was a Griffin family, and a couple of these Peters folks married Griffins. So there were a couple of folks there that, or a couple of families that did stay in the area and intermarry a little bit later as well. They weren't all first cousins, but there were an awful lot of those.
Rick, was it possible to tell between Amos and Sarah whether they themselves were of mixed blood? I mean, identified as Black, African, but where they were in slavery, or he was at one time?
Early on, I went through that. I think it was before you checked in, Diane. So let me review that.
I'm sorry.
Sarah had been enslaved in Guinea, where she was born, and brought to America and sold to a ship captain who had property at the south end of South Pond in Warren. She won her emancipation by suing based on the Massachusetts outlawing of slavery in 1783. She had saved some money and was able to hire a lawyer for $1 who argued that she too should be, because Maine was a province of Maine and that law should apply here. So she won her freedom that way. Amos was part African and part Wawenoc. He was from Plymouth, Mass. And so, I mean, they started out then as a sort of a mixed marriage, didn't they? Mm-hmm. Because he had Native American roots as well as Black.
Thank you.
I would like to encourage anyone who's down in that Warren area to visit the cemetery. It's a little tricky to find, but there is a sign out on the road, and I don't remember the name of that road, Rick. But if anybody's interested, I have directions to it from the article that was in the Working Waterfront, I believe. And it's not too far off Route 1. No.
Maybe you could even take a group of
a very beautiful kind of tree-lined path, and then the cemetery is surrounded by a chain link fence. But it's
well maintained.
It seems to be well cared for and very quiet and
the cemetery.
Maybe you could take us there on a walking tour once mud season is over.
It was a little tricky to find. We drove by the sign the first time, had to back up, but.
Yeah, well, that's because Corliss was driving and her navigator misremembered which way the road was from the sign. So we took the next drive and it was somebody's house. And we stopped and asked the woman who was there, and she said, "Oh yeah, we need to go back out to the road and take the drive on the other one up," which wasn't nearly as prominent.
That's the fun part of cemetery research, as we all know, right? Mm-hmm. So.
Any more questions?
No, I think your choice of this, Rick, was wonderful this time, because Gates is doing a special on PBS, the history of Black churches, and it was 2 hours last night, and again, I think tonight. So
it's actually 4 sessions.
Yeah.
So it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And of course, this was not the reason that this was selected for this time, but of course it is Black History Month.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I was just saying it was good timing.
Yeah, that was just serendipitous, I think. So next month, we're going to have a little bit of a shift, and I'll turn it over to Sharon, who sent out a survey to our local members from a list of programs that have been compiled by B.J. Jameson, who had to go to a meeting, who is at the state library and loves to give programs. And she submitted a list of programs that she could offer us. And of course, in the day of COVID, she doesn't even get a day off work. She has to do them from work. But she gave a list, and Sharon's going to tell us what the winning choice was.
Yeah, so thank you to all who replied to the poll. So the winner was a bit of a dark horse in my mind. It's Hidden Resources, Family Search Catalog, and Beyond. So hopefully some good tips. BJ has quite a catalog of all of the programs that she offers now. So I think it'll be a good one. So that will be next month. It will be, let me check the date. Wednesday, March 17th at our regular 2 p.m. So, and I will send out the Zoom link a week or two before. So look out for that.
And we always welcome any of our members or even non-members who would like to present a program. It's easier than ever. You don't even have to leave the comfort of your home. And share that with us. Corliss.
Maybe I should remind, Sharon sent me a second update to our membership list.
Oh, yes.
Dues records. But if anyone has still not paid their $5 dues for the year and you'd like to, you can mail a check to the Belfast Free Library now for $5 and put, what are we putting? Wawenoc group in the memo line?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Sharon's name.
Something
Well,
like
you can just write the check out to Belfast Free Library, and then in the memo line is it'll just be what our bookkeeper kind of records as what it is. So you could put like genealogy group dues for 2021, and then or Wawenoc genealogy group, something like that.
And spell Wawenoc, you can at least put genealogy, right?
Yeah.
Sharon Davenport, I know that you just moved back, so if you don't think we have your current address and so forth, you might want to include that too. Address and phone. Yeah, thanks.
Maybe you could send her a membership form.
I could. Would you like that, Sharon?
Sure. Can you just upload it to the computer?
Yeah, you can fill it out and email it back to me.
What is the time frame? Is it January through December, the membership?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sharon, I'm going to look up what email address I have for you. Hold on a second.
Oh,
Or maybe you could just put it in the chat. Anything else? We'll keep Sharon here, both Sharons actually, while you.
Oh, I forgot, Rick. I was going to ask if anyone here was working with the program on Apple Family Tree 9. If anybody was working with that particular program, Family Tree 9 on Apple Mac? No? Okay, thank you.
Sharon Davenport?
She put it in the chat.
Address is Sharon_D@fairpoint.net.
no, that one's done. No, it's SharonD_US@yahoo.com. And I did put it in the chat.
Okay, Sharon D.